The trick is to not get lost in the abyss of wondering why they don't treat you as well as they treat their many admirers and charitable recipients and acolytes. Because for them, validation is a numbers game. You are just one person. But to be validated by hundreds or thousands or millions, to them, it's numbers. So, what do I mean by communal narcissism? You're going to like this one. These may be the most frustrating ones of all, believe it or not. Communal narcissism is a term that was coined by a researcher named Gebauer and his colleagues in Germany. I first encountered the term in a 2012 paper that he had written, and he was attempting to distinguish communal narcissism, the thing we're about to talk about, from something he called agentic narcissism, which is a sort of fancy way of talking about our usual narcissists, the ones who get their validation from grandiosity and arrogance and entitlement, the ones we already know. But these communal narcissists are a very different animal. They get their validation from doing stuff for other people. So they do whatever it is they do for other people or causes or organizations. And that's all good and well, you're doing stuff for other people, right? But they're doing it to get validation. Now, I know some of you are watching this and thinking, aren't we all a little guilty of that? A little bit sometimes, Dr. Ramani? Aren't we all doing something to at least get a thank you at the very least? I'm not so sure about that. I mean, sure, when we give of ourselves to other people, getting a thank you is nice, but for a healthy person, it may not be their primary motivation. So let me give you a few examples. One, maybe, I don't know, an ardent animal rescue person. And I actually think animal rescue is one of the most wonderful things a person can do, to rescue a vulnerable animal and then treat it in a humane manner. But then that animal rescue person turns around to draw a lot of self-serving attention to it, about it, taking pictures of the animals and trying to find homes or fundraising. Oh no, it's not about that. It's about posting pictures of themselves with the animals and going to some effort to look good with the animals and really pitching it from a holier-than-thou position. Posting an image on a social media site like, despite my busy schedule, I'm giving up my Saturday to ensure these cats have homes. It sure takes special people to find special creatures their forever home. And then they make sure they're in the picture and sit back and wait for the validation. Now, if the validation does not come, they will not be pleased. It wasn't just about the cats. If they do not get enough likes or enough, you're so awesome, they might not take their frustration and disappointment out on their social media followers. They may, but also they may very well go ahead and take it out on the people close to them. They may become irritable or sullen with their partner or get surly with their children or whomever is unfortunate enough to be near them when they felt that they did not get enough validation for their do-gooding. Now, we see this play out in many ways. People who maybe grandstand at school auctions, bidding on the trip to the ski condo, so not only can everyone see how much money they have, but so they can look good and get big public thanks for giving so much money to the school. Or the person who attends all the galas and makes a big show of jumping up and making a big donation in front of everyone. Or the person who is involved heavily in their small town politics and lobbying heavily to make sure they have their name on the Little League field. Now, these are also the people who ensure that their charitable moments are very well documented. They definitely make sure that there are videos and photos which promptly appear on social media. Or if it is a more prominent person like a celebrity, it may be that they do their do-gooding, serving at the soup kitchen or delivering food or whatever. They make sure someone always takes lots of pictures of it so their do-gooding makes them look good too. Now, the main driver of their do-gooding is to seek out validation. At some level, you can take the stance of, all right, They may be annoying, but their effort or their time or their money is going to benefit animals or kids who want to play baseball or kids who need scholarship money or teacher training or whatever it is or whomever it benefits. And yeah, I'll give you that. That is a good thing because we need more of all of that. So then that begs the question, who really does get hurt by these communal narcissists? The people around them. The people who are close to them, and this can include their partners, their family members, their kids, and the poor volunteers who may be working alongside them. Now, if you are a partner of a communal narcissist, the disconnect can be really unsettling. Everyone sees your partner as the angel, the charitable citizen of the year, the mensch. Communal narcissists are really masterful at looking really good in public and as people who give and do good things. And then they turn around and they can really treat their families and partners pretty badly. Their disappointment about perhaps not getting enough recognition for their efforts, or the fundraising not raising enough funds to make them look good, or the gala not quite going quite right, or the local election or event not turning out quite right, that disappointment will get launched at someone, and their partners are the most likely target. And because everyone does view these communal narcissists as saints, it can be very hard to get support from other people while you suffer in this relationship. You are much more likely to be gaslighted by other people who will tell you that maybe it's you with the problem because it certainly can't be the charitable soul that you are married to. Because here's the deal. Communal narcissists, like all narcissists, are entitled, arrogant, grandiose, have inconsistent or non-existent empathy, they're superficial, they're validation-seeking, all of it. But it all gets framed in the service of doing good for the world framework. Their entitlement will come out in how they expect to be treated. I may care about these kids we are raising funds for, but I better get the best table in the house, or else. Or their grandiosity comes out in how they portray themselves as a Mother Teresa. They sort of humbly purse their lips, but their charitable deeds are really designed for them to arrogantly believe that they know better than everyone else and will save the world. It's very virtue signally. Their superficiality is in caring more about how the event or the images or the brand looks than the actual work or genuine regard for the beneficiaries of their charity. Their empathy isn't really empathy. And I must say that in the more dark cases, they actually sometimes even have contempt for the people that they are trying to help. And their lack of empathy is clearly visible in how they may treat people whom they do not value as validation. They may be able to turn it all on and be all kinds of empathic to the journalist writing about their cause, or when they're talking with big donors or during the photo op, but behind closed doors, watch out, as there's often hell to pay. They do a beautiful job of being the humble humanitarian when the cameras are rolling. But once the lights go off, it can be quite brutal for their staffs, their families, and anyone else who is considered by them to not be worthy of their humanitarianism, I guess. There can almost, with communal narcissists, it can have like sort of this really sort of unseemly underbelly. It's almost like they choose the most chic cause at the given time. They show up like the great hope. They tend to be sort of costumed out. They get lots of pictures. But then, like I said, once the cameras turn off, there's kind of like a, okay, I'm good, like the pictures are done. And an almost contemptuous rejection rather than sort of a respect or a mutuality for the very communities they're trying to serve. Any of you who have ever volunteered in one of these settings knows exactly what I'm talking about. They're the people who have been in there with their sleeves rolled up to their elbows for decades, often asking for no recognition, but just simply being devoted to the cause. And then there are the people who sweep in, and they need to have their pictures plastered over everything. They ain't going to be at a soup kitchen unless the flash bulbs are flashing. So I think you're kind of getting a feel for what this communal narcissism is about. So in the next episode, we're really going to break it down and how it might touch a variety of relationships in your life where it comes from, and then in part 3 we're going to get into what to do about it. Now, if this is your family member, especially if you grew up with a parent who is a communal narcissist, you know the hypocrisy that's built into this pattern. I have actually heard this most often from people who had a parent, especially a father, who was a religious leader, for example, a pastor, rabbi, or priest in a given religion. While the community would crow on and on about what a wonderful soul this parent was, childhood might have actually been anything but a loving and kind space. Instead, it could have been quite controlling, cruel, entitled, unempathic, with people feeling their parent, their own parent, chose the parishioners to get all that validation, while at home there was little support, kindness, compassion, love, or certainly godliness. This sentiment has also been echoed by people who had other sort of do-gooder parents who did good for the world, but didn't do much at home for the family. These could have included teachers, doctors, local political figures or not so local political figures, therapists, yikes, yeah, fundraisers for local, national, and global causes, heads of nonprofits, or philanthropists. These were people who could have been viewed as living saints by those who were inspired by their work or their effort or their time or the money they raised or the fact that they work weekends. But how could they know that these people may have very well been in it more for the validation, drinking up the award ceremonies and the honors and the media coverage, but not able to share empathy and respect for their own children and partners? The hypocrisy can make this a unique form of narcissistic abuse, since children who grow up like this are very unlikely to get support from other people and may even be viewed as insolent or bad kids for thinking or speaking bad thoughts about their oh so giving charitable parent. People who grow up like this can often feel gaslighted on the daily. People will often tell them how lucky they are that their dad is the pastor, or that their mom is the big donor around town, or that their mom or their dad does so much for the school. A child is often not able to make sense of those inconsistencies and may often typically blame themselves for not being a good enough kid. And communal narcissists also really care about how things look to the world. And you may have been roped into countless big grin family photos with your communal narcissistic parent, with your parent far more concerned that you looked good for the photo op that made them look good. And then after the photo was taken, that big grin fades, and your narcissistic parent may then once again leash their disappointment, their control, or other negative emotions out on you. In the workplace, interestingly, it's the same drill, especially if you work in what is supposed to be a charitable or socially giving space. I personally remember once working with someone who was viewed as just being the savior of the world, and people would line up to see this person. And every other week she was jetting off to one or another award ceremony, leaving the rest of us to actually do the work of this so-called organization. So for those of us who were assigned to her team, it was pretty awful. She would spread gossip, triangulation, insist on all kinds of goodies on her trips like first-class upgrades, and she would work her staff mercilessly. She went through 5 administrative assistants in 3 months. I gotta tell you, I imagine that whole flock of hers that was so benefiting from her charity would have benefited from the extra thousands that cost. And what was most galling was that she actually spoke dismissively about the very people she was supposed to be helping. And on a stop within the community one time, with the people she was supposed to be helping, you could see the disdain on her face, but no one else saw it because they didn't hear the things she said. She needed to be adored for being a do-gooder, and the public enabled her by going with it. Her staff turnovers somehow went unnoticed, and she sat in an office just where the walls were covered with plaques and certificates and photos. I quit. And I got to tell you, since then, I've witnessed many a PTA mom bake Herculean amounts of cupcakes and raise countless dollars, but then gossip heartlessly about the parents who didn't meet her elitist standard. And then she would cajole her little Johnny for not learning Mandarin or for not getting a NASA internship. The hypocrisy of all of it is what makes communal narcissism so unsettling. Now, this takes us into another area where we see communal narcissism, which is amongst people who are religious leaders of any kind. And these can be priests, pastors, rabbis, imams, it doesn't matter, any kind of religious leader. Many times the power, privilege, and position can allow a handful of people in this group to get validation from their parishioners and then may abuse this position. When they are called out on their behavior, they may hide behind scripture and holy books or a holier-than-thou stance that their position of being a religious leader will give them. They may also be enabled by their parishioners or followers or whomever the members of the religious group are. And if you attempt to let people know your concerns about a religious leader that seems to be a communal narcissist, you may be silenced by the people who may blindly adhere themselves to that religious leader on the basis of good old blind faith. This model can even extend into other sort of new age healing spaces in which people who term themselves as spiritual and who get their validation from somehow being spiritually woke can behave in a manner that is entitled, self-serving, invalidating, and then hide behind their so-called magical healing persona. This can be seen in New Age healing settings, shamanic situations, and other places in which people may enter in a way that's very well-intentioned because they want to grow or learn about themselves, and then they may fall into a community of people who are enabling a toxic spiritual leader. Obviously, the most extreme form of this is seen in cults, and frankly, cult leaders are just malignant communal narcissists, people who get validation from their cult followers and then they exploit them. These spaces of religion and healing can be particularly vulnerable spaces because people enter these spaces from a place of trust and seeking safety. And at times they enter these places from a place of vulnerability. And here's the deal though. Here's the deal. There is not one profession on the planet that is narcissism free. And communal narcissism reminds us that people who may sell themselves as well motivated for the greater good may actually be serving their own needs for superiority and validation first, before empathizing with their flocks and followers and whomever else is willing to follow them into the dark. So why are we drawn to them? Well, because they rescue animals. And they raise money, and they're trying to cure malaria, and they do really cool stuff, and they get super cool pictures all over the world, and they're like rescuers and humanitarians. You can imagine their daydreams that they have about the Nobel Peace Prize that they desperately want, and how good it would look if they got a Nobel and put it on social media. Now, I know I'm being a little bit snarky, but the fact is we're drawn to them because they often are doing some rather amazing stuff. And important stuff, to be honest with you. It gets a bit tricky. If the work is indeed important and benefiting people, even if their intention is their own personal validation above all else, isn't it still okay? Honestly, that's a philosophical issue. If you told me that someone just raised millions of dollars for an excellent literacy initiative, or found homes for countless dogs and cats after a flood, so they weren't euthanized. But then that person went home and was verbally abusive to her family. To me, that's a complicated call. Because in that way, you can see how a communal narcissist is the narcissistic type that may be the most likely to be enabled, and that the people close to them are suffering in a rather unique manner. Even their own family may actually be inspired by what they are doing, but have the basic want of a loving and respectful partner, or a present and empathic parent, or a respectful and honest boss or colleague. Those expectations, those wants are more than reasonable. Personally, I do often get very bummed out. It actually just happened to me a month ago when I was reading something. When I see a person who really was pitched, and we all believed was a real do-gooder, turns out to be not so good. Communal narcissists disappoint us in a way that other narcissists actually don't. We really actually want to believe in them. And the cognitive dissonance of the good and the bad can feel really uncomfortable, which is why, for many people, they attempt to believe the charitable agenda of the communal narcissist and then try to minimize the other information. So as you can see, communal narcissism starts getting into some interesting spaces, and some people will say, you know what? I had this sort of person I thought was spiritual, or, you know, was this religious person, or was this sort of gifted, amazing teacher in my community. But then I came to find out they were actually really not nice to their family. And people really struggle with that tension. Well, maybe because they were doing so many good things, they didn't really need to be that nice to their family, or doesn't it all cancel out? From my chair, and again, this is a philosophical issue, I don't think it cancels out. I really don't. I think that the kindness we have for one person is a measure of the entire universe. I'd rather hear that people are being kind to each other as individuals. And I don't know that doing good things necessarily would have to replace the other. Keep in mind too, and we're going to get into this in part 3, many people, most people out there doing good things are motivated to do those good things because they're good things. And in turn, they're also nice to their families and their loved ones. That's the majority of people who are committed to do-gooding. The reason this type is so confusing for us is because these are people who are do-gooders on the face of it, and then we come to find out they're actually really not nice people. And they did this so they could have this identity of being a humanitarian, which gave them the narcissistic supply they needed, and then would turn around and mistreat the people around them and yet be able to get away with it because all the enablers they had, because they're like, go be charitable, while their families were the ones that suffered. So stay tuned for part 3, because I hope you're interested in this, because to me this is actually one of the more fascinating kinds of narcissistic patterns. And then we're going to talk about how this affects us and how exactly are you supposed to cope with it. Up to now, we've really established it, that these are the narcissists who, strangely enough, get their validation from doing good for other people. And you might think, well, that's all right. They're doing good for other people. Well, the challenge is, despite getting the validation and needing the validation from other people for the good things they do, they can turn around and actually be quite invalidating and nasty to the other people in their life. So as long as they're getting that other stuff, great, but they can be quite mean to their staffs, to their families, to other people around them, their partners, you name it. So in this episode, in part 3, we're going to break down why are they like this and how exactly am I supposed to cope with this? Because, yikes, I don't have anyone to talk to. Everyone thinks my mom is a saint, and yet not so much. So before we begin on Communal Narcissism Part 3, please hit that button, subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, and you'll be informed just about every day when we post a new video. So let's start with an interesting question about communal narcissism. Why are they this way? There may be a naturally extroverted element and a strategic element that allowed communal narcissists to recognize that doing things for other people can quickly get them the one thing they need more than helping other people, and that's validation. But for all the usual reasons that people become narcissistic, attachment issues, early trauma or disruption, emotionally unavailable early environments, all of those are also likely at play. They may have actually been raised in a family in which doing these charitable things was viewed as what you do, and they may even model a communal narcissistic parent's technique of getting validation by doing stuff for other people. Their core insecurity, as always, means that they're attempting to bolster their fragile interior to feel safer or look better, and by looking good to the world and doing nice things, it allows them to get that desperately needed validation in a way that may feel safe. And that safe thing to do is helping other people. Now, in general, Communal narcissists may overlap with other narcissistic types. Now, Gebauer's research suggests that the communal narcissist gets their validation from social do-gooding rather than through things that are totally self-focused and don't attempt to do good by others, like buying a new handbag. That said, this communal style can overlap with the other styles of narcissism. A communal narcissist can still be quite grandiose, so that's similar to the other styles. They're good at being strategic with their empathy and wielding it when it will forward their cause and garner them even more validation. They can be quite entitled and expect to be treated like a sort of rock star humanitarian and all the other stuff that we see in the grandiose narcissist. The arrogance and superficiality. They do, of course, need to look fabulous while they're doing all that do-gooding and getting validation. And believe it or not, in some cases, you get a few malignant traits in there as part of the communal pattern, with a willingness to exploit people and take advantage of other people to make their cause look good. Now, while covert narcissists may not be naturally drawn to the communal space, there can be some overlap with communal narcissism, often sort of playing upon their own victimhood and even using their own victimhood as a platform for their cause to get validation. It can start to get a little bit uncomfortable. A key dynamic in this style is that they do get angry when they perceive they aren't getting enough validation. They can become sullen, petulant, and frustrated that people aren't noticing their efforts in the way that they want, or they may get angry and rude to their staff or at governments that aren't cooperating, and ultimately may take all of this anger out at those close to them, like their family. Now, as I noted before, this type of narcissism can really do a number on people who feel guilty, confused, and angered by the hypocrisy. People experiencing narcissistic abuse from a communal narcissist may also struggle with getting support from a world who sees the communal narcissist as an angel and may not understand the backstory. Now, it can be very hard to step away from these relationships for these very reasons. These relationships are confusing, making it hard to leave, and the guilt can make it quite sticky. The self-doubt that you may be reading the situation wrong can also leave you less able to cope or set boundaries. The key to managing these relationships is to trust yourself. It doesn't matter how much money they raised or how many elephants they saved. Taking a page from the divine Maya Angelou, she says, when someone shows you who they really are, believe them. And also remember that she said, people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. Someday you're going to forget their good deeds, but you will remember how they made you feel. Growing up like this means you may have had a natural draw to people who are these kinds of confusing do-gooders. Just be critical in your thinking. Communal narcissists are the wake-up call that narcissists are so often the proverbial wolf in sheep's clothing. Now, managing them is similar to managing any other kind of narcissist, with the added hitch of not letting the hypocrisy get to you. Don't engage, maintain realistic expectations, have radical acceptance. Fluffing them is actually pretty easy. Praise them for all the good things they do, write them a check, and it can often get them off your back for a while. The trick is to not get lost in the abyss of wondering why they don't treat you as well as they treat their many admirers and charitable recipients and acolytes. Because for them, validation is a numbers game. You are just one person. But to be validated by hundreds or thousands or millions, to them, it's numbers. And you, as one person, are not 100 people. It is important to not personalize this dynamic and wonder what it is that you are lacking and what do those other hundreds of people have. They don't have anything. They just have strength in numbers. And when you can let that go and not get so surprised When the communal narcissist leaves the fundraising event with a big smile on their face and immediately turn it off once they are in the car with you headed home. It can be unsettling, but once you recognize it for what it is, you can engage in radical acceptance and figure out if you want to be just one more admirer or actually set a boundary and step away. Listen, doing good things, being better than, reaching out to help other people, and being the change we need are all wonderful things. But I have to say, in the grand scheme of things, going back to my original philosophical question about the person raising all the money and being a communal narcissist, this is just me, but I actually think the world would benefit more from people being good to the people close to them and making that a priority, more important than the money for literacy or the money for the elephants or the money for the cats. Healthy people can do both, and they do it all the time. Compassion starts at home and in how we treat people when the doors are closed and nobody is looking. Ultimately, the real heroes are the ones who quietly do, with little to no care about the recognition and acclaim, but because it was the right thing to do. Healthy people are able to raise the money for the elephants, save the cats, go to the gala, whatever it is, and still be kind to the people around them. It doesn't need to be an either or. Unfortunately, with communal narcissists, it is. But if any of you who have run into this type and said, oh my goodness, this was a tough one for me because they really didn't treat me well, but they were doing so many nice things for the world, I didn't know which way to turn. Always face towards the light. And the light is the place where you are respected, where people are treated with kindness and compassion, whether or not the cameras are rolling. I hope that this little mini-series has clarified communal narcissism for you. It's not always something that people talk about, and I was really happy when Gebauer's research came out because I really think it lent an important understanding in the field, and it gave some people a sense of like, ooh, how come I just went on this healing retreat and I felt like the healer was really mean? That might be why. So thanks again for tuning in. Always look for the key ingredients: the lack of empathy, the entitlement, the grandiosity, the arrogance. Look for that. The bells and whistles around it may be different as we see in communal narcissism, but it seems like all roads do lead to Rome. So thanks again for tuning in. Please hit that bell. Please hit that subscribe button. We'd love to have you as part of this YouTube channel, and I look forward to talking to you more about narcissism.